Jeremiah opened his eyes as the pain set in. The ground was cold, almost comforting. But what had happened? Gunshots rang, echoing from straight ahead. He was already too late, but how long had he been out? He reached out and grabbed his BB gun with a hand that stung from the deep scrape in his palm that he'd gotten during the fall. Damn that root. He'd never have missed it during the daylight. He got to his feet, but his body was screaming at him to turn back the other way, away from the danger. He took a deep breath and started running again toward the village. Legends of Wasteland City is a post-apocalyptic anthology series and may contain references to drugs, sex, and violence, along with the occasional vulgarity. You've been warned. Don't Stop Shootin', Chapter 1. Jeremiah was the firstborn of 11 children to a mill worker and his wife in southern Louisiana. It was only a generation after the fall of the United States government, but not much had changed around these parts. See, in the backwoods of southern Louisiana, they'd never much cared for the government anyway. And just like before the fall, the people pretty much kept to themselves. If they ever did have the rare occasion to go to the big city of Nolens, which was a half-day's ride south from Jeremiah's village, they made that trip a quick one, getting whatever supplies they needed and heading home as soon as their business was done. Jeremiah's pa warned him time and time again that the big city was all but lawless. After the fall, the population had declined to a small fraction of what it used to be, and with no government, there was no one left to keep the peace. The police and United States National Guard had tried to keep things from falling apart as the world fell to shit, but had given up when it became obvious there was no stopping it, and every single one of them went back to protect their own families. Or it might have been simply that their pay stopped coming in. Next, it was the gangs that took over the streets, all vying for control of something. There were the gutters, who initially took over the city's water treatment plant just to help keep clean water flowing, but after a while turned to extorting people for a few gallons at a time. People that couldn't pay could still get their water from the rivers and swamps, but without a half-decent filtration system, they'd just give themselves the runs and die of dehydration anyway. Those waterways were real nasty for a while. Some say the Northerners had run out of room in the cemeteries and were disposing of bodies by dumping them by the thousands in the Mississippi to be carried out to sea. So for people in Nolens, paying half a day's earnings for a few gallons of the clean stuff might have seemed well worth it. Then there were the tollmen, who charged a tax for crossing the main bridges in and out of town. And as their numbers slowly grew, they'd have posts set throughout the city grid, charging a toll sometimes just to cross the street. Other gangs came and went, some rising to power before being taken out by another gang, or even an uprising by the people they tried to control. The rules were always in flux, depending on who had control that week. And now that the railmen had gotten one of the old train lines running again and organized all the gangs, things were better, in some ways. The rail line ran from the panhandle of Florida all the way west to the ranches around San Antonio, Texas. Trains came through every few days, and an economy grew around it. Oranges from Florida, water and lumber from Louisiana, and pigs, corn, and wheat came from the Texas farms again. Now, most of the cities in the old United States were dangerous for their own reasons, but outside the old urban centers wasn't daisies and roses either. Marauders trolled the freeways and routinely ransacked villages. And unlike the gangs in the cities that thought of themselves as entrepreneurial businessmen with rules and some semblance of restraint, the marauders were just out to steal what they could and would kill anyone who happened to be in their way. Jeremiah Sr. and his wife, a plain-looking woman he called Cherry, who was whittled down from Cherry Pie, and nothing like her given name of Beatrice, decided their lot in life was to keep their heads down, work hard, help their small community rebuild, and make as many children as they could before her body couldn't make any more. Their community, which was called Springville before the fall, had taken to calling itself Mudhaven in the last decade or so. It was positioned well off any main freeways and surrounded by miles of old forests and farmland. Pa and a few of the other villagers were sawyers at the old Way House Mill a few miles north. The Way House used to be called the Weyerhauser Sawmill and was moved piece by piece when the electric lines were shut down. Like so many things, the Way House resorted to old technology and was rebuilt alongside the Tickfaw so its massive saws could be turned by the power of the river. Working in the mill wasn't the safest way to make a living. The old regulations and safety measures were largely disregarded, and it was up to every man to look out for himself. But in all honesty, not much was safe in the New World. That all came to full realization when one of the villagers came home early from the mill with a broken arm and told Jeremiah's mama that his pa had been killed when the blade came loose on its rod and kicked the log it was cutting back across the mill floor. Pa had pushed the broken-armed villager out of the way, saving his life but sacrificing his own. And so, just like that, at 11 years old, Jeremiah Jr. became the man of the house and went from helping with the garden and fixing things up around the house, well, the things he could do himself, to working in his pa's stead at the mill, at half the pay, of course, since he wouldn't work anywhere near the saw. He mostly got tasked with shoveling sawdust and running water to the other men. They still needed money and the food, and even though the mill scared the piss out of him, he worked every day the best he could. Mama Cherry was devastated about Pa's death, but Jeremiah never saw her cry. He'd hear her sobbing late at night after all the other children had fallen asleep, and that's when he'd cry too. It felt good to let it out, but if she could stay strong for the other children, he'd try to as well. Now, I mentioned Jeremiah was one of 11, but at the time of Jeremiah Sr.'s death, Jeremiah had only 5 little sisters and 2 little brothers. The other 3, 2 boys and a girl, Mama Cherry had in the 4 years after Pa passed. When the children asked about the men that would come by from time to time, Mama Cherry told them she still wanted to get them birthday presents one way or another, and left it at that. Jeremiah had received one such present, a rusty old air-powered BB gun with a glass jar of BBs to shoot. One of the villagers, an old-timer named Pops, helped him clean the rifle and had it looking almost new, and then taught him how to line up the sights, breathe lightly, and even feel out his heart so he could squeeze the trigger between beats. In no time, Jeremiah was shooting old cans off a fence post from 50 yards away. Plus, he'd quickly learned that the more accurate he was, the better chance he had of finding the BBs around the fence post with a radio speaker magnet on a string. After he'd mastered that, Pops taught him how to shoot his father's 9mm pistol, though Jeremiah preferred the BB rifle. It was a dry spring when they got word at the mill that marauders were making their way north around the city and could be coming through any day. Mrs. Reynolds, the owner of the Way House, made a third of her workers camp overnight at the mill. They all took turns, so every third day Jeremiah would pack 2 days' worth of food and an extra pair of socks, and he'd spend the night at the mill, taking his turn on guard, watching for any sign of the marauders coming up the road or crossing the river. Jeremiah would bring his old BB rifle with him, electing to leave his pa's 9mm handgun with his mama. The BB rifle wouldn't do much to stop a man hell-bent on violence, but it was something, and maybe he'd get lucky and hit an eyeball or a tooth. He didn't sleep very well during his guard shifts, even when he was supposed to be taking his turn resting in the cot with sawdust-filled burlap sacks for a mattress. He'd lie awake dreading the thought of marauders showing up. He'd never shot even close to towards a person. On his 4th shift of guard duty, and just before dawn, while he was once again not sleeping in his bunk, the marauders did find their way to the mill. The men of the Way House put up a great defense, scaring the marauders off with a couple volleys of gunfire and a whole lot of yelling, even before Jeremiah had made his way over to where the fighting was happening. He hid behind a pile of logs, clutching his BB gun and trying not to be seen by the other sawyers. The marauders must have figured out it wasn't worth it after a volley of gunfire hit a couple of theirs, and the rest ran off the way they came, leaving 2 men to bleed out in the woods behind them. As Jeremiah was stuck just trying to catch his breath, he knew that if the marauders backtracked the road they approached from, the only other way they could go would take them right through Mudhaven. And seeing as he was the only one of the village on shift at the Way House tonight, he had to warn them. He gathered what little courage he could muster and approached Mrs. Reynolds, who was glaring out at the tree line, where the 2 injured marauders were still calling out for help.
Mrs. Reynolds, I need to get back home.
Mrs. Reynolds didn't bother to look over.
The mill needs you here, son. Those fellas could make another run at us.
But...
Now Mrs. Reynolds looked right at the still small for his age Jeremiah.
You left that pistol with your mama, right? She'll be fine. Now, get back to your spot and keep a lookout in case those boys come back at us.
Ma'am, you don't need me here. You got everyone.
Now, damn it, or you'll be out of a job.
Jeremiah slunk back to a spot on the outer wall of the mill, his mind racing with awful possibilities as he waited there next to the other sawyers for a good 10 or 15 minutes, fighting back tears the whole time. It had taken all of 24 men here to fend off the bandits, and the villagers back home didn't exactly represent their best. Pops could handle his own, but he was old and getting slow. Benny and Jacob, the 2 other men that would be there, wouldn't be much help either. Jeremiah sat there as the wails of the injured marauders slowly died off. Those bandits wouldn't be coming back this way. He had to warn his family. He jumped up from his position and ran to the opposite wall of the mill, making his way out the door that led to the lumberyard.
Oh, damn it, Jeremiah.
He headed for the trail that went straight south alongside the tickfall that only the locals knew about. It just might get him back to Mudhaven in time to warn the villagers and get their defenses ready. He ran as fast as he could through the thick forest that lined the trail. He thought about yelling, but it wouldn't do any good until he was much closer. In his flat-out sprint, his foot caught a tree root and he went down hard, dropping his BB rifle out in front of him and hitting his head on the ground. As he came to, he could hear yelling and gunshots from Mudhaven. He was already too late. He picked up his BB gun and ran even harder until he came out of the woods on the north side of the small town, just as daylight was breaking. The Mudhaven villagers were already putting up a fight and seemed to be holding the marauders off at the bridge, just like they'd practiced so many times before. He ran over to where Pops was stationed behind an old tree trunk, trying to make every shot count with his deer rifle. A few other villagers were also scattered around, but with only 3 guns between them and not enough ammo to keep this going for long. Pops felt Jeremiah slide in next to him.
Jeremiah, thank goodness you're okay.
It's the marauders. They hit the mill, too.
We heard the shots. They must have more than one group, because these guys were already in the village when we got here. I popped that one, and the rest scattered back across the bridge.
Jeremiah looked to where the 2 roads of the village met, and sure enough, there was a dead man laying there, with ground meat where his face should be, and a shotgun half covered under the weight of his body. Pops took a shot across the bridge and loaded another round in his bolt-action rifle.
I've only got 2 left. Think you can get to that fella's gun?
What? No.
Pops could see that Jeremiah was afraid.
Just remember, being brave is being scared, but doing it anyway. Now, out of the 2 of us, you're the faster runner, and I can cover you from here. You run when I say, and bring the shotgun right back here.
Jeremiah felt a pit in his stomach hearing the words that Pops had told him several times before. Being brave is being scared, but doing it anyway, and could only muster up a small nod. He took the strap of the BB rifle off his shoulder, propping his toy weapon up next to the old man. Pops lined up a shot on one of the marauders that was ducked behind the bridge guardrail. He waited till the man edged himself out an extra inch, and Pops held his breath.
Go.
Jeremiah didn't move.
Go, damn it, now.
Jeremiah ran as fast as he could toward the dead marauder's body. Behind him, Pops took a shot, taking out the bandit behind the guardrail, and quickly reloaded. The 2 other villagers with guns, Benny, who'd become a half-wit after getting the sick and was holed up behind a boulder across the street, and Jacob, a man even older than Pops who shot from an open door of the shack behind Benny, did their best to cover Jeremiah, but were running low on ammo themselves. Jeremiah made it to the body but couldn't pry the gun out from under the man's weight. He was a sitting duck, and the marauders were taking the opportunity of this new target firing at him from behind their wooded cover. Pops quickly finished reloading and took aim as Jeremiah finally managed to free the gun from under the body. But the dead man's hand still gripped the gun like it was glued on. One of the marauder's bullets hit the dead body, so Jeremiah flung himself on the ground behind the pile of meat, using it as cover. As he laid there and pried the fingers loose one by one from the gun stock, he saw an odd brand on the back of the dead man's wrists, a star with a wound rope in a circle around it. Pops took his last shot at a white-bearded marauder firing at Jeremiah from behind an old ash tree. This shot hit just above the bandit's head, who quickly re-aimed at Pops and fired back, hitting Pops in the shoulder.
God
Pops fell back behind the stump as Jeremiah made a run for it, back to cover, and held the shotgun out to Pops.
I can't.
You have to. I've never shot one.
Pull the grip back.
Jeremiah pulled back the grip of the shotgun with a satisfying click, and an empty shell flew out of the side. He pushed the grip back to its forward position.
There. Now it's loaded. Do the same after every round till you're out. He only took one shot, so if he came fully loaded, you'll have maybe 8 more.
With his good arm, Pops motioned to the other 2 men to move up, and they took turns running to new cover toward the bridge.
You're protecting your family now. So once you start, don't stop shooting till they're all dead.
Jeremiah finally looked over to the house where he lived. He could see his mama's face watching him from a broken window, scared out of her mind. In the other window, he saw 3 of his siblings peeking out past the curtains. His mama turned away from the window she was at, and then just her arm appeared, pulling the 3 away from the other one. He knew she'd fight with everything she had if the marauders got past him and the other villagers, but their best chance was if they stopped these bad men before they crossed that bridge again. He stood, aiming the shotgun toward the white-bearded bandit that had shot Pops and fired. It felt like he'd been kicked by a horse and he lost his footing, falling backwards on his ass and dropping the gun. His shot had peppered the other end of the bridge, though, and it bought him a few seconds to get back to cover next to Pops, who looked at him with sorrowful eyes. Jacob and Benny ran across the street toward them, firing away at the bandits. Jacob fired the last of his bullets and dropped his gun, moving as fast as his old legs could take him to reach the shotgun in the dirt. He picked it up, re-racked it, and took a shot across the bridge, peppering it with buckshot. The white-bearded marauder ran back away from the bridge, covering his face with bloody hands. Seeing this, the last 2 marauders turned to run away together. Jacob looked down at Jeremiah, cowering next to the injured Pops.
You check on the others. We'll make sure that lot don't come back.
He and Benny moved together across the bridge. Jeremiah looked over to his old house where his family was held up, and then over to Pops, who waved him off. He was already standing up and making his way back to his cabin. He'd be able to patch himself up. The young man tried to catch his breath and ran over to his house, but before he could get there, his mother opened the door with his pa's 9mm in her hands and crossed paths with him.
Marilyn and Walter.
Jeremiah's 7 and 9-year-old siblings.
What about them?
Have you seen them?
No.
They were fetching water for breakfast. Oh.
Don't Stop Shootin' was written, narrated, and directed by me, Mike Makeshift Darling, and features the voice talents of Alexis Van Dam as Jeremiah, Jay Preston as Pops, Mallory Trinnell as Mrs. Reynolds, and Jessica Kinney as Mama Cherry. Legends of Wasteland City is a production of the Apocalypse Post and Studio Ruckus, and is sponsored by the Love Bombs and backed by our many Patreon supporters, such as Badger, Wildling, and Clarissa Gorchinski. You too can help support Legends of Wasteland City by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/theapocalypsepost. Stick around after the break for a few notes about today's episode with Makeshift.
The Love Bombs provide top-notch outcomes for the most discriminating clients all across the wasteland. When you need executive escort and protection, intelligence analysis, direct action, or other specialized solutions, the Love Bombs provide a bespoke option tailored directly to your needs. Listen to this heartfelt testimonial from one of the Love Bombs' satisfied clients.
I heard the Love Bombs had saved my precious Pookie Pie from them there scabs over yonder. They was fixing to turn his poor hide into jerky. Woo! Whew! I reckon not a one of those bastards will walk away from this scuffle.
Because it's on the body part.
Goodness gracious, I reckon I ain't ever seen a gun that big. The Love Bombs will give your enemies a licking they won't soon forget.
Yes, the love bombs. They're polite, professional, and have a plan to kill everyone they meet. The love bombs provide complete confidentiality in their free initial consultation. That's right, the initial consultation is absolutely free. Remember, the love bombs. Artillery available.
Want to show off your Wastelander pride with a steady stream of patches to wear on your post-apocalyptic costume? Well, it's never too late to join the Apocalypse Post's Patch of the Month Club, available exclusively on our Patreon. Members who sign up at the $10 tier or higher will get an original patch from the Apocalypse Post, Legends of Wasteland City, and the greater Wastelander community, delivered to their mailbox every month. There's even a tier with 2 patches for you and a survivor friend, or a 4-patch tier for you and your tribe. Sign up today to help support the show and maybe fill a few holes in that old jacket you found on the side of the road. Hey survivors, Makeshift here. It is good to be finally back with another season of Legends of Wasteland City. I absolutely love these stories, and even though these take a lot longer than my normal podcast, which is more of a discussion and chat show, I think it's really fun and definitely worth it. So make sure that you're subscribed, because we've got a lot more stories coming for Season 2, although I'm not sure if it'll really necessarily be seasons from here on out. We're going to call it Season 2 for now, but it might just be when I have a story done, I'll launch it, and when I don't, I won't. That might just be how it goes. But yeah, we've got more stories coming up on Legends of Wasteland City from Sign Edge, Daniel Bain, the Farlanders, and a new installment from Schofield's Drifters. This one will just be a single episode this time. Maybe. It might be 2. We'll see. But yeah, I'm very excited because we're continuing to involve the Wasteland community and tell stories from beyond my own mind, which is fantastic. And things are not necessarily getting interwoven yet, but you'll start to see that, different episodes might mention certain tribes that are all interconnected. And Legends will continue to spread well beyond the lore of Wasteland Weekend, but it'll all kind of be in the same world, because the lore of Wasteland Weekend is very much grounded in a science nonfiction future, but it's kind of up to the tribes to decide when and where everything's taking place, how the world ends. There's a lot of different stories that people have. Some people definitely take the Mad Max, oil wars and nuclear wars kind of future. Some tribes get inspiration from Fallout, which is, again, nuclear war. But then there are definitely tribes that take inspiration from, a more natural kind of end of the world, which is what we're doing here with Don't Stop Shootin'. And let me tell you a little bit about this story. So, Don't Stop Shootin' is inspired from a few different things. One of them is, I've been living in the South for a little bit. Well, Tennessee? Yeah, Tennessee counts as the South. It's kind of the mid-South in a way. It's not the deep South by any means. And yeah, I've definitely taken some inspiration from just being here and all the travel that I've been doing down to Alabama, of course New Orleans, which is where this takes place. And just kind of, I wanted to incorporate a little bit of that Southern culture into it, which I think is kind of fun and a little bit different than the very California desert feel of our last group of stories. And the other major player that inspired the story was actually an NPR story. I don't remember where it was, but I was just listening to the radio. I heard it. It was a very short story. It might have been on This American Life or something like that. And I don't know, because I was driving and I couldn't write it down. But I did take a quick note in my phone that was basically this real thing that happened. And I'm not going to tell you the full story because it'll give things away. But yeah, just know this is very loosely based on a true story that took place after the Civil War, when the slaves in the South were all freed. And there you'll get to see a lot more of that coming up in later episodes of this one. When I was writing this story, I spent quite a bit of time just on Google Maps, trying to find real places, real distances, real roads that are traveled. Springville is a real place. And, I changed the name to Mudhaven, but there is actually a Springville. And the Weyerhaeuser, I don't even know if that's how it's pronounced, but the Weyerhaeuser sawmill is a real sawmill nearby. And of course, I moved the location. I say it got torn down and rebuilt along the Tickfaw. The Tickfaw, again, real river. So, as you're going along, as we kind of push forward in this story, all the places are real. And I don't know. I think that's kind of fun. Hopefully I don't get sued. Is that even a thing? Probably not. I don't know. And then another interesting thing about this story versus some of the other Legends of Wasteland City stories is that this one takes place only one generation after the fall. So these kids that we're talking about here, they're pretty much the first ones to be born in the post-apocalypse. All the old-timers very much remember the way things were before the fall. And in this case, the fall is mostly because of an illness that goes around called the sick, although there is definitely a series of events that happen around that. But the major start point, the button that got pushed in this case was a illness that went around, and it killed most of the people, but the ones that survived it would come out the other side of it, I believe I say, of half mind and half body. Basically, if you managed to survive this thing, you were barely a shell of yourself. And the sick comes into play a little bit later in the story because there is a secondary illness that will come into play. And I think you guys will find it pretty interesting. I know I sure did when I discovered it during the writing. And what else? Oh, let's talk about the cast a little bit because, well, first off, let me just say that thanks to your support on our Patreon, especially with having added the Patch of the Month Club, and a lot of people upgraded their support to join the Patch of the Month Club, and a lot of people have joined for the first time ever in order to become a member of it. This season, all of the voice talent are getting paid. And that's really exciting for me, being able to pay the talent, because they're doing an amazing job, and I want to pay them appropriately. Now, of course, I'm not paying... the budget is not full yet. It's about half what I would pay for some of my more professional productions. But I am very excited to say that everybody's at least getting a token amount for their work on this. And I think that that's very exciting. And so, if the Patreon keeps growing, hopefully we'll get it up to where I feel really good about what we're paying everybody. But for right now, I'm just celebrating that everybody's getting paid, which is really cool. Another next step is going to be to start paying writers for their stories as well. It takes a lot of time to craft these stories, and being able to give back to the writers and give them a place where they can actually earn a little bit from their story, it will be really cool. So hopefully that'll be in the near future. I don't know if it's going to be this season or next, but hopefully that'll be something that we can do. But so as far as the voice talents that you heard in this story, I was super excited to hear Alexis Van Dom's read for Jeremiah. This was cast through Backstage, and I had only put up a couple of characters. It was basically Jeremiah and Liv, who you'll meet in the next episode. But Alexis's read was absolutely stunning, to put it bluntly. Obviously, Jeremiah is a teenager, a young teenager, and very young, very youthful in the world. He has not been out of his hometown more than a couple of times. He has recently become the man of the house, having to be, more of a provider. And he probably has a lot going on. He's kind of scared of the world. And part of that is because his father kind of taught him to be scared of the world, but also just losing his father to the mill accident was a big deal. So Alexis had a really great, honest, wholesome, but still comical, where it was supposed to be, read for Jeremiah. And it took me a long time to cast, because I put the casting notice up months ago, and I could never get Alexis's read out of my head. So it was done and done. As soon as I heard Alexis's read, I was like, that's my Jeremiah. Jay Preston is reappearing. He did a bunch of read for Legends of Wasteland City Season 1, and he's back as Pops and doing a great job. I loved his read for Pops, which was really great. Mallory Trinnell, who also read who was also in season 1, shows up again as Mrs. Reynolds, and she had a lot of fun. I don't think she got to do a whole lot of VO between the seasons, so she was very excited to be on again as another character. And then a friend of mine from LA, Jessica, came to play Mama Cherry, and she just moved to just south of Nashville, which is really fun. We were friends in LA, and I didn't even realize that she was here until she posted up something on Facebook, and I reached out and I said, hey, what are you working on? We should do something. And we started talking about Legends of Wasteland City, and she had a fairly new voiceover setup at her place, one that's going to get better as things move on, but I was like, hey, let's do this thing. And so she's in there as Mama Cherry. A lot of these actors will be showing up again as different characters as well. So very excited to have a stunning cast for this. And I've even got, I'm not going to give it away yet, but I've got a Wastelander that's going to show up as well as one of the voiceover actors. She was in my list of people that had auditioned on Backstage, and I just really liked her read, and I reached out. I didn't even know it was a Wastelander. I actually know who it is, which is really exciting. But yeah, I'm not giving it away yet. I want you guys to be surprised later. But you've maybe seen her work for some of the Wasteland Weekend stuff. So that'll be the hint for now. Anyway, I think that's about all I've got so far. I'm really excited to be back doing this. I absolutely love doing these audio dramas. I think they're a ton of fun, and they take me back to like indie filmmaking, which is pretty much where I got my start in the whole like media creation world. So thanks for listening. If you want to help support the show and help support the voice actors doing it for us, you can sign up at our Patreon at patreon.com/theapocalypsepost. Don't forget, we do have the Patch of the Month Club up and running. For anyone that signs up at the $10 level or above, you'll get a patch every month in the mail, and it's always going to be an original, sometimes exclusive creation from someone in the Wasteland community, or right here from the Apocalypse Post and Legends of Wasteland City. I'll have the announcement for this month's patch coming out really soon, so keep an eye out. If you're not following us on Facebook, it's the Apocalypse Post. We also have a newsletter if you want to join that, although I've been not great at getting that out very often. I need to get better at that. And what else? I guess that's about it. So, yeah, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed episode 1. Episode 2 will be out in a few weeks, hopefully. And we're already in the countdown coming up to Wasteland Weekend, which I'm really excited about. Oh, did I get to tell you guys this? This was really fun. I believe at Neotropolis, I was talking with the Schofield's Drifters, Doc and Digits, and they mentioned that someone, one of you that listened to the show, found them at Wasteland and knew them from this podcast. And I thought that was so cool. That was one of my dreams that would happen, is someone would discover this podcast first and then make their way to one of the festivals and then meet some of the characters that you've already known through the story. And it would be like, I might be grandiosizing it a little bit, but then it would be a little bit like going to Disney World and seeing Mickey Mouse for the first time. Like, you know this character, and then here they are in real life. And yes, Doc and Digits from season 1 are real life people that play real life characters, and they're very much in character for quite a bit of the event. So yeah, someone out there met Doc and Digits after hearing about them from this show, which is really cool. All right, guys, that's about it. So make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening, leave a comment or a review if you can. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. But if you hated today's episode, please share it with your enemies, along with a glass of water from a river that is full of dead bodies from the north. I'll see you next time, survivors. Till then, stay alive.